All right, story 4. This goes with lesson 4 called Fire on the Mountain. This is in your classics for young readers with the dragon on the cover. Fire on the Mountain. An Ethiopian folktale. We're on page 17. Retold by Harold Corlander and Wolf Lissau. People say that in the old days of the city of Addis Ababa, there was a young man by the name of Ara. He had come as a boy from the country of Guraj. In the city, he became the servant of a rich merchant, Haptom Hassi. Haptom Hassi was so rich that he owned everything that money could buy, and often he was very bored because he had tired of everything he knew, and there was nothing new for him to do. One cold night, when the damp wind was blowing across the plateau, Hampton called to Ara to bring wood for the fire. When Ara was finished, Haptom began to talk. "How much cold can a man stand?" he said, speaking at first to himself. "I wonder if it would be possible for a man to stand on the highest peak, Mount Sululuta, where the coldest winds blow, through an entire night, without blankets or clothing, and yet not die." "I don't know," Ara said, "but wouldn't it be a foolish thing?" "Perhaps. If he had nothing to gain by it, it would be a foolish thing to spend the night that way. But I would be willing to bet that a man couldn't do it." "I'm sure a courageous man could stand naked on Mount Sululuta through an entire night and not die of it," Ahura said. "But as for me, it isn't my affair, since I've nothing to bet." "Well, I tell you what," Hampton said, "since you are so sure it can be done, I'll make a bet with you anyway. If you can stand among the rocks on Mount Sululuta for an entire night, without food or water or clothing or blankets or fire, and not die of it, then I will give you 10 acres of good farmland for your own, with a house and cattle." So there's this guy, and he's got everything he ever wants, and he's talking to his friend who was probably kind of like a servant to him, and he doesn't really have anything, and he says, "Hey, if you can do it, I'll give you, 10 acres of good farmland with a house and cattle." Ara could hardly believe what he had heard. "Do you really mean this?" he asked. "I am a man of my word," Hampton replied. "Then tomorrow night I will do it." We're in the middle of page 18. Ara said, "And afterwards, for all the years to come, I shall till my own soil." But he was very worried because the wind swept bitterly across the peak. So in the morning, Ara went to the wise old man from the Guraj tribe and told him of the bet he had made. The old man listened quietly and thoughtfully. And when Ara had finished, he said, make sure I've got the story right. Okay, no, I was wrong. So Haptom is the rich guy, and Ari is his servant. Yeah, I was right. So the old man listened quietly and thoughtfully, and when Ara had finished, he said, "I will help you. Across the valley from Sululuta is a high rock which can be seen in the daytime. Tomorrow night, as the sun goes down, I shall build a fire there, so that it can be seen from where you stand on the peak. All night long you must watch the light of the fire. Do not close your eyes or let the darkness creep upon you. As you watch my fire, think of its warmth and think of me, your friend, sitting there, tending it for you. If you do this, you will survive, no matter how bitter the night winds. So it sounds like this old wise man is going to help him. Ari thanked the old man warmly and went back to Hampton's house with a lighter heart. He told Hampton he was ready. He was ready, and in the afternoon Hampton sent him under the watchful eye of other servants to the top of Mount Saluta. There, as night fell, Ara removed his clothes and stood in the damp cold wind that swept across the plateau with the setting sun, at the top of page 19. Across the valley, several miles away, Ara saw the light of his friend's fire, which shone like a star in the blackness. The wind turned colder and seemed to pass through his flesh and chill the marrow in his bones. The rock on which he stood felt like ice. Each hour the cold numbed him more until he thought he would never be warm again. But he kept, top of page 20, his eyes upon the twinkling light across the valley, and remembered that his old friend sat there tending a fire for him. Sometimes wisps of fog passed. He sneezed and coughed and shivered and began to feel ill. Yet all night though he stood there, and only when the dawn came did he put on his clothes and go down the mountain back to Addis Ababa. Hampton was very surprised to see Ara and questioned his servants thoroughly. Did he stay all night without food or drink or blankets or clothing? Yes, his servant said. He did all of these things. Well, you are a strong fellow, Hampton said to Ara. How did you manage to do it? I simply watched the light of a fire on a distant hill, he said. What? You watched a fire? Then you lose the bet, and you are still my servant, and you own no land. But this fire was not close enough to warm me. It was far across the valley. I won't give you the land, Hampton said. You didn't fulfill the conditions. It was only the fire that saved you. Ara was very sad. He went again to his friend of the Garage tribe and told him what happened. Take the matter to the judge, the old man advised him. Ara went to the judge and complained, and the judge sent for Hampton. When Hampton told his story, and the servants said once more that Ara had watched a distant fire across the valley, the judge said, No, you have lost, for Hampton Hassay's condition was that you must be without fire. Once more, Ara went to his old friend with the sad news that he was doomed to the life of a servant, as though he had not gone through the ordeal on the mountain top. Don't give up hope, the old man said. More wisdom grows wild in the hills than in any city judge. He got up from where he sat and went to find a man named Halu, in which house he had been a servant when he was young. He explained to the good man about the bet between Hampton and Ara, and asked if something couldn't be done. Don't worry about it, Halu said after thinking for a while. I will take care of you. Some days later, Halu sent invitations to many people in the city to come to a feast at his house. Hampton was among them, and so was the judge who had ruled Ara had lost his bet. When the day of the feast arrived, the guests came riding on mules with fine trappings, their servants strung out behind them on foot. Hampton came with 20 servants, one of whom held a silk umbrella over his head to shade him from the sun, and 4 drummers played music that signified the great Hampton was there. The guests sat on soft rugs laid out for them and talked. From the kitchen came the odors of wonderful things to eat, roast goat, roast corn and dura, pancakes called injera, and many tantalizing sauces. The smell of the food only accentuated the hunger of the guests. Time passed. The food should have been served, but they didn't see it, only smelled vapors that drifted from the kitchen. The evening came, and still no food was served. The guests began to whisper among themselves. It was very curious that the Honorable Halu had not the food brought out. Still, the smells came from the kitchen. At last, one of the guests spoke out for all the others. Hallu, why do you do this? Why do you invite us over the feast and serve us nothing? Why, can't you smell the food? Hallu asked with surprise. Indeed, we can, but smelling is not eating. There is no nourishment in it. And is there warmth in a fire so distant that it can hardly be seen? He asked. If Ara was warmed by the fire he watched while standing on Mount Solulta, then you have been fed by the smells coming from my kitchen. The people agreed with him. The judge now saw his mistake, and Hapton was ashamed. He thanked Hallu for his advice and announced that Aru was then and there the owner of the land, the house, and the cattle. Then Hallu ordered the food brought in, and the feast began. The end.